Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our press conference today on immigration. I'm Anthony Advincula, Community Media Initiatives Coordinator here at Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. This briefing, which is part of our Not Your Same Old Sources series, will focus on the most updated information on immigration and how to cover immigration responsibly using reliable and timely data and sources. As you know, this is just so timely and critically important because yesterday marked the first 100 days of President Trump's second term. And according to the Migration Policy Institute, the Trump administration has taken 175 immigration-specific executive actions since January. Interestingly, a recent Pew Hispanic Research Center survey found that 32% of US adults believe all undocumented immigrants should be deported. As newsrooms navigate a new set of ethical challenges reporting on immigration under the Trump administration, it's so important for us to also keep ethical reporting practices in mind. So let's start with a discussion on behalf of the Center with Joe, Stephanie, and Cassandra. Thank you all for being here with us, and I will now hand it over to our moderator, Colleen O'Dea, senior reporter at New Jersey Spotlight News.
Thanks so much, Oni. It's great to be here. I am honored that you've asked me to do this. I'm going to try to give a brief overview, and I certainly can't touch on 175 actions, my goodness. But certainly, you know, we know that immigration is one of the issues that won Donald Trump the presidency. And while campaigning, he promised mass deportations. So a lot of these actions shouldn't be surprising. But I think they're somewhat more aggressive maybe than people expected. The scope is also surprising, going after non-criminals, targeting those with legal status, and at least attempting to ignore due process and judicial rulings. Before we get into that, I do want to kind of talk about New Jersey and where we stand. You know, the census estimates in 2023, we had about 2.25 million immigrants in New Jersey. That's about a quarter of the total population. Immigrants are the reason that the state's population keeps growing. Otherwise, we have more outmigration. Almost half of our foreign-born are from Latin America, about a third from Asia, 6 in 10 are married. Nearly half are college graduates, 70% are in the workforce. Their unemployment rate was pretty low, 3%. 11% were considered living under the poverty limit, but we know that many more are struggling because that federal poverty line is kind of meaningless in a state like New Jersey that is so expensive. About a little more than half are homeowners. Again, from census, about 56% are naturalized citizens, which leaves almost 1 million who are not. There are other estimates, not from the census, that say about 470,000 are undocumented. To look kind of broadly then at some of the actions that the Trump administration, in no particular order, we know that, you know, they've halted a number of humanitarian programs for those seeking asylum or refugees status. Border crossings have fallen. By contrast, we know that over the last half century, the U.S. took in roughly 73,000 refugees a year. They've sought to end a number of temporary protection programs. Many of those have been paused by the courts, but we hear that Trump will likely allow temporary protected status for Afghans to expire next month, which certainly could put a lot of folks in jeopardy if they get sent back to Afghanistan. More TPS lapses could follow. There's the requirement that immigrants 14 and over register in order to facilitate their eventual exits from the country. He's trying to end birthright citizenship. The injunction against this is going to be heard. A current injunction against this action is going to be heard before the Supreme Court next month. Trump signed the Lake and Riley Act, which requires detention of undocumented immigrants charged with even the most minor crimes. They've revoked student visas, then pulled that back, at least temporarily, but they've moved to deport a number of high-profile student cases involving really free speech rights on campuses. These include the green card holder Mahmoud Khalil of Colombia, and the Turkish student, I'm going to butcher this name, I'm sorry, Rumeysa Öztürk from Tufts, who was apprehended by masked Homeland Security agents. I think a lot of people saw that on video. These two are on hold, at least at the moment, due to the courts. They've deported U.S. citizens. We hear that children who are U.S. citizens have been deported with their mothers, at least one of whom has cancer. They've used the Alien Enemies Act to justify the deportations of large numbers of alleged gang members. And they're not, in some cases at least, following court proceedings, particularly in that case where the administration did not turn around the plane with 200 people headed for El Salvador. They've deported non-criminals. The highest profile case there perhaps is the one involving Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father sent to an El Salvadoran prison. Federal officials say that that was a mistake. The courts have ordered his return, but there seems to be no progress there. He's revoked safe spaces, allowing ICE to go into schools, hospital, and churches where, agents were not able to go before to try to detain people. Amidst all this, we really don't know how many people are being deported. The Department of Homeland Security has stopped posting statistics on its website since President Biden left. Some say that they think that the daily deportation numbers are below Biden era levels. Still, ICE arrests have doubled at least. And there are a backlog, as I understand it, of about 3 million cases. Trump has cut the number of immigration judges. And again, these are administrative judges, not judges sitting on a bench who issue court-ordered warrants. Currently, there are not enough beds to hold the detained. Of course, we have the situation with Geo Group planning to reopen Delaney Hall in Newark with 1,000 beds. The Newark mayor is opposing that, and there's going to be an appeals court hearing in Philadelphia on Thursday, that's tomorrow, over the state's appeal of a lower court, a district court decision that the state law barring new immigration detention facilities cannot be applied to private prison companies like Geo Group and CoreCivic, which operates the Elizabeth Detention Center. We have the Immigrant Trust Directive in New Jersey, issued in 2018, which prevents local law enforcement from working with ICE unless there's a criminal warrant issued by a judge. But don't forget, the interim U.S. attorney said recently on TV that she is investigating Governor Murphy and Attorney General Matt Platkin over that directive, even though it has been upheld by both state and federal courts. Advocates say that to better protect immigrants in the state, we really need to codify that directive and pass the Immigrant Trust Act. New Jersey has seen some ICE raids. A number have made the news, including one at a Newark seafood store that included a military veteran whose legal status was questioned, the popular owner of a South Jersey restaurant who ultimately is back out of detention, a Flemington father of 2 who was just going for his work authorization. People are being detained when they show up for check-ins. There are many impacts on New Jersey. I'm not sure that we have the stats to back that up at the moment, but we certainly hear anecdotally that there's an atmosphere of fear in immigrant communities. Some undocumented people are not sending their children to school, or they're not seeking health care, or they're not reporting crimes. Even some legal immigrants are worried about traveling or about speaking negatively of the administration in public. Our schools are now having trainings on how to deal with ICE. According to our State Department of Education, New Jersey ranks second only to California in our population of immigrant children. 40% of students live with at least one immigrant, and more than 10% live with at least one undocumented person. We're facing other potential impacts in the area of labor and the economy, potential reduction in the growth of GDP. The ag, construction, and services industries could see labor shortages. So that was a mouthful. And I know that there's lots more to talk about. So now I want to get into it with our panelists. First, I want to introduce Linda Dakin-Grimm. And Linda, if you will tell us a little bit about yourself, what your area is, and also tell us what maybe I missed, or what's the most important issue that you think is happening right now in terms of immigration.
Thanks, Colleen. Thanks for that overview. It was a mouthful. That was quite a lot. My name is Linda Dakin-Grimm. I spent many years as a commercial litigator doing business type disputes, but for the past 10 years or so, I've worked exclusively in the immigration field, working pro bono. That means that I started during the Obama years, worked through the Trump years, and then the Biden years, and now again. I've represented hundreds of individuals in their immigration cases, and in the Trump 1, I started suing the administration on behalf of organizations and individuals, and participated in cases in which we enjoined many of their illegal practices. I settled my final Federal Tort Claims Act case against the federal government based on the family separations in 2017 and 18, right before Trump 2 started. And now I'm continuing to do that work. Yeah, that's what I do. In terms of what I don't think you missed anything, but I would love to share a couple slides to maybe orient us on what the difference is between what the law is now and what policy is, just so we're all on the same page. There are between 10 and 12 million people in the United States right now without official permission to be here, without legal documents. Some of them are immigrants, and lots of the people that we hear about in the news technically are not immigrants. Students, for example, who are here on a visa to attend school are not considered immigrants, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Who are these people, though? There are only 4 roads to come to this country under the law as it exists now to live, work, and build a life lawfully. The first is family-based migration. That's what opponents to it call chain migration, creating the impression that the camel gets his nose under the tent and then brings hundreds of people after him. But in reality, that can take decades to bring even a single family member. And it's quite limited. You can see it's limited to only 226,000 people a year. The next is employment-based migration. And that's limited to 140,000 people a year. That goes, a couple months into the year, all of that is used up. That's available to highly skilled workers with corporate sponsors who can prove that nobody in the country lawfully already can do that work. The third is the diversity lottery, which is a teeny tiny little amount, 50,000 people who are highly vetted before they come. They win an actual lottery in their countries. And the fourth is humanitarian relief. That includes asylum, certain special immigrant visas, trafficking visas, crime victim visas, those sorts of things. That's it. If you don't qualify in one of those boxes, you might fly in on a tourist visa and overstay, or you might try and cross the border and just live without documents. Or you might fit in another box. If you could go to the next slide. There are people that are not considered immigrants, meaning people who are allowed to be here for a short and defined period of time and then are expected to leave. The government does not, and our law does not consider such people to be immigrants. They are non-immigrants. They're here on non-immigrant visas. One of those situations that you hear about in the news all the time now is TPS. TPS stands for temporary protected status. It is part of US law. It's been in existence since the 1990s. And it is a law that allows the US Secretary of Homeland Security to announce, we will have a period of temporary protected status for people from a particular country for a period of 6 to 18 months due to emergency conditions in the home country that prevent people who happen to be here from going home safely. It's called temporary, and it was always meant to be temporary. It offers no path to staying long-term or ever getting a green card. So when the administrations announce, as they do from time to time, that they are ending TPS for a particular country, from their perspective, they are saying your 6 to 18-month period is done. Please go home, and expect that people will. Unfortunately, most of the people who were awarded TPS at different points in time did not understand what they were getting. With TPS, you can apply for and have a work permit so you can support yourself during the temporary period you're here. But it has never been intended to be a road to come to the US and stay. DACA is a similar situation. DACA is at this point almost a historical anomaly, but it was never intended to award a road to become a green card holder. And then other than those two, there are various non-immigrant short-term work permits. So when you hear people say they're here on a work visa, something like that, that usually means it's a non-immigrant permission to be in the country for a short period of time. And the expectation is you'll leave at the end. Okay, students similarly are non-immigrants. So when they get a visa to come and study for a particular time, sometimes those visas include an additional year where you can stay in the US for a year and work afterward. But none of those groups that I just addressed are considered by the government to be immigrants. And therefore, when their status ends, they're expected to leave. That's the situation we're in right now. What the last comment I'll make, Colleen, before turning it back over to you is you mentioned that the current Trump administration has issued more than 100 executive orders, and they are, many of them relate to immigration related things. The first Trump administration in the first 100 days had issued maybe 20-something executive orders. Executive orders are not how this country passes laws, but the public doesn't seem to know that. They seem to be saying, oh, well, I guess this is how we do it now. But in fact, Congress in this country has the law-making right and ability. Out of frustration that Congress has not changed immigration laws in decades, the first Trump administration just ignored the law and implemented policy. And what we're seeing in this administration is that on steroids, where President Trump holds up a piece of paper and says, look what I've pronounced, this is my executive order. And then nonprofit agencies are left to run to federal court and say, this is unlawful. So that's the situation that we're in right now. It is highly unusual. I know reporters don't want to say everything is unprecedented, but this is a very unique time in history when the president is usurping or taking over the role of Congress, just pronouncing this is how we will do things. And then when the actions are challenged in federal court, being at best cagey about whether the administration will follow the rulings of federal judges.
Thanks so much for that overview, Linda. And it's really important to note that it is very hard for someone to come here legally if you want to become a U.S. citizen. Now I'm going to turn to Amy Torres, who's the executive director of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice, which is really, our boots on the ground group that knows what's happening in our communities, how people are reacting. Amy, do you want to give a better introduction of yourself and just kind of tell us what is the most significant thing facing immigrants in New Jersey today?
Sure. Thank you so much, Colleen. And it's a pleasure to be here with Tony and Linda and see a lot of familiar names in the audience. Before I jump into introduction, just want to apologize for being off camera. I'm dealing with a family matter and a little bleary-eyed and in the car while joining today's call. So I will spare you the close-up of my face. But my name is Amy Torres. I'm the executive director with New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. We are the state's largest immigration coalition. As a coalition, we bring together over 60 different organizations from every corner of New Jersey who work to serve, empower, and to protect immigrant communities. So that's everything from the senior center in your hometown that does free meals to the ACLU of New Jersey or New Jersey Policy Perspective. If there is a group or an organization that has an interest or has a membership that is focused on New Jersey immigrants, more than likely they are a member of New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. I am really thrilled to be here with Linda and sort of offer the advocate's perspective on what's happening. So I thought as part of this introduction, I'd say a little bit about my own self and experience with immigration policy over the last few administrations. Colleen did an excellent job talking about who immigrant New Jerseyans are and what stats look like across the state. And I'd like to revisit that a little bit. But I'd like to spend a bit of time talking most about what do we hear as advocates? What are the common narratives or tropes or misrepresentations about immigrants, and especially here in New Jersey? And then talk a little bit about threats and opportunities that we see in the months and years ahead. So to say more about myself, I've worked in immigration policy for the majority of my career, first in New York City at a social services agency in Chinatown. I was actually hired as part of an initiative to get the word out about DACA. And importantly, as Linda said, DACA is not a pathway to citizenship. If folks remember, DACA was actually a concession for not passing the DREAM Act. But it's one of the few policies that we've won at the federal level to protect immigrants from deportation. That's why it's called deferred action, right? They're deferring your deportation or detention. But I started that work again under the Obama administration, and have been in immigration policy since then, through Trump's first term, then the Biden administration, and now. And I think something that's really important to remember is that even though the news cycle may move on, and immigration may not be something that is paid attention to in every presidential administration, immigration policies, regardless of who is in the White House, have become more punitive and more restrictive in time. They have not become more permissive. And often what we see in Congress is that if there is some sort of pathway toward reprieve, and again, I say reprieve, not citizenship, some sort of relief. When that happens, it's usually paired with some sort of anchor that actually exacerbates what is creating the problem and the bottlenecks in our immigration system to begin with. And that anchor often looks like increased border technology or use of surveillance. It may look like increased funding for immigration enforcement officers. What we see right now with the proposal that the House put out this week is a budget that's, nearly 6 times the size of what immigration enforcement has ever been since the Department of Homeland Security has existed. So I just, want to make sure that even though we're all paying attention to this topic right now, we do need dedicated reporters who are following this as an issue, because the thread is becoming more and more bare as we go through administrations, even though, some use immigration as a hallmark and, tend to make more headline news than others. And a great example, of course, being, and this is sort of moving into talking about like the picture of New Jersey, is that New Jersey, we have faced litigation from the federal government for in every single administration since Trump's first term. So the New Jersey Immigrant Trust Directive, which Colleen spoke about at the top of our call, the Trump administration sued the state of New Jersey over that. New Jersey was actually the first state to have one of its sanctuary policies challenged by the federal government. In 2021, under the Biden administration, New Jersey passed a ban on ICE detention contracts, which Colleen also mentioned. That ban was also later challenged and joined by Biden's DOJ to oppose that ban and allow for private corporations to contract with the federal government in the state of New Jersey. And again, as Colleen and Linda said, we're facing threat and attack again under Trump's return to the White House. But it's important to recognize that even as states are making progress on the immigration front, there's this sense from Washington that they are the sole leader of the conversation and the sole fixer of a conversation, yet things have not really been fixed. I want to move into what we are hearing as a coalition, what advocates and service providers are hearing on the ground. First, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the narrative that we see on immigration is something that has been stretching on for decades. I think if you were to ask one of your outlets' average readers when immigration really became a hot button topic, they may tell you 2016, but please remember that, this is something that has been fomenting for a very, very long time, even under the early Obama years, challenging the veracity of his citizenship, talking about U.S. citizen-born children as being anchor babies, right, for the rest of their family, terms like chain migration, things like that. Often we hear, and you'll hear this a lot of times from New Jersey's own delegation, that we need comprehensive immigration reform. And it's true, we really have a fundamentally broken immigration system. I'd like to have folks guess, when was the last time that both Congress and the White House were on the same page? When was the last time that we were able to pass comprehensive immigration reform? Can anyone take a guess?
19 years ago.
Yes, I see some people who are both more optimistic and more pessimistic than me. I see 19 years ago and in the 80s. The last time we had a presidential administration actually coordinating with Congress on passing something was under President George W. Bush. And that package was created over the summer of 2001. It was introduced in August of 2001. And I think we all remember what happened in September 2001. And that proposal, which was going to fix so many of the problems with, what at the time was the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, that was the last time that we really saw hope at addressing major problems that are baked into our immigration law. And I see folks in the chat mentioning, the 80s, the Reagan administration, even the first, the elder senior Bush. There were many attempts at regularizing people who were left behind by the existing system. But because of what happened in 2001, and because there was already mainstream acknowledgement that major cracks and fissures existed in our immigration system, that is how the Department of Homeland Security was able to be formed. That's how the Bush administration was able to push for immigrations and customs enforcement as a departure from immigration and naturalization services. And I think even just, the terminology says a lot about the missions of those two agencies, even though one supposedly adopted the programs and services of the other. So often when we're confronting the narratives we hear today that are coming out of Washington, a lot of those same feelings of, well, I support immigrants, but only the legal ones. My family came here the right way. Why can't other people come here the right way? But as Linda shared in her opening slides, that right way has become an ever diminishing bottleneck that is really, really difficult and actually incredibly expensive to be able to get through. Essentially, what we've created over the last few decades is a pay-to-play democracy system where unless you have the resources and access in your home country to be able to apply and process for some of these legal pathways towards citizenship, it is extremely unlikely that you would be able to get it even once you come to the United States. And so we have a very privileged immigration system of those four narrow pathways that exist. Another framing that we hear often is that, well, it'd be great to welcome more people, but we just simply don't have enough resources, right? Look at our problems with housing. Look at our problems with prices and the economy. We need to take care of Americans first before we take care of immigrants. This is a narrative that we hear really, really often. But here in New Jersey, the Garden State, we know that it's immigrants that are actually the ones driving and building our economy. Immigrants over participate in New Jersey's economy relative to native-born New Jerseyans. Colleen shared the quote about 1 in 4 New Jerseyans being foreign-born, but 1 in 3 essential infrastructure workers in New Jersey. And essential infrastructures, those sectors that are, critical care, like the care economy, healthcare, logistics, and food and service and food production. These really things that are essential to making our world run day to day. 1 in 3 of those workers in New Jersey is an immigrant. And immigrants in New Jersey really over contribute to taxes as well. In New Jersey, they pay over $3.6 billion annually in state, local, and federal taxes. And undocumented immigrants alone make up a substantial part of that 3.6 billion. So the scarcity, I think, really comes from a place where it's easy to scapegoat a community that's already at the margins of public sympathy and that has been the target of this multi-decade scrutiny and narrative campaign. And then, of course, the last narrative that we hear much more today than in years past is that the administration is going after criminals, right? That if you're here with the right means and you've come here the right way, that you're not going to be subject to attack, that they're really just going after criminals. But what we're seeing is that their lens and definition of criminal seems to mean anyone that they don't like. Whether that's anyone who is dissenting against US policy, anyone who maybe doesn't look like what the Trump administration believes a white American should look like. I think many of us remember on the campaign trail that President Trump said that immigration was poisoning the blood of America, and that there's this sort of threat to their heritage. I think I'm probably not included, so I won't say our heritage. But, you know, if they were really just going after criminals, or if there really was this, you know, roving criminal network of gang members and whoever else, it's surprising to me that, you know, so many US citizens have been ensnared in the high profile arrests and even deportations that we've seen, including US citizen children. It's, you know, if there is, again, this mass horde of dangerous people taking over every street corner in America, then why is it that some of the first arrests were of academics, right? Or, you know, electrical engineers, or people who have, you know, expert positions in society, or who, as Colleen mentioned, as with the family of the restaurant in Haddon Township, and, you know, a number of other New Jerseyans who've just been doing the right thing, which is showing up for their check-in or renewing their paperwork. Those people have been subject to detention and arrest as well. So really, these cases are highlighting cracks in the facade about who the administration is going after.
Thank you so much, Amy. That's such, I mean, wow. I'm so glad too that you got into the financial, economic numbers, because those are really important. Along those lines, along the lines of what you were just talking about for either or both of you, what are the current laws? Like, have any of the laws changed in terms of the rights that immigrants have, or is it just the policies, the way that the administration is trying to enforce them? Have those changed?
Well, I can jump on that. 0 laws have changed. Congress has not changed any law applicable to immigrants, whether they are in a student visa or a work capacity or anything else. It's all been done with policy this time, and often in an unlawful way.
Yeah, and I think what's very important to recognize, which is why folks in New Jersey are pushing for laws like the Immigrant Trust Act, is that the laws have not changed, nor has the people who take up the enforcement jobs changed. And folks may remember in late 2020, there was a huge report about the number of Oath Keepers and Proud Boys that are recruited to ICE and to CBP. And that, you know, these large networks exist to sort of recruit folks that already have an anti-immigrant lens into this immigration enforcement arm. And so when you see this confusing volley of executive orders that are issued and then rescinded by the courts and then issued again in a more narrow way, really what it's doing is serving to confuse those who are trying to follow the law and empower those who have their own personal agenda to do whatever it is, because they know violations of due process are very likely to be, you know, not going to be countered, and that protestations against them are likely to be ignored.
Yeah, I see a question in the chat that is right along these lines. Are there any consequences for unlawful acts by the federal government? Are there?
I was just trying to respond to that. Yeah, there are. Well, again, on the overuse of the word unprecedented, we are at a critical moment in history where it's the feds who are violating the law in many instances, and it is agencies like Amy's and others. I actually don't know if Amy's involved in the federal challenges, but there are more than 150 lawsuits challenging the actions of the administration, and many of them relate to what we're speaking of. But the question that we're now seeing is, will the administration comply with orders of federal judges? And that is a deeply constitutional question that we've never faced before. But if you want to follow what consequences there will be, I do have a slide of resources where you can get data. But on that slide, there is an agency called Just Security, one word, justsecurity.org, I think, that has a publicly available tracker of all the lawsuits. There we go, all the lawsuits against the federal government. And they update that quite regularly. So I would suggest that you keep an eye on that. There's some other resources here that are also useful. One is Lucas Gutentag from Yale has a resource called impolicytracking.org that tracks the policy changes, the things that the administration is just doing, sometimes without even announcing. But you can keep an eye on those and you know what's happening with them. And then I highly recommend Austin Coker's Substack. Austin worked for years putting together track reports, which for years was at Syracuse University. And if you're looking for data that is reliable, and I would second, I think it was Colleen, but maybe it was Amy saying that you really can't rely on ICE or EOIR is the Immigration Court acronym. You can't rely on their data now. It's not reported regularly and it's full of inaccuracies. But Austin Coker often issues corrections that the government then adopts. So those are places that you can go to find information on the changes in real time.
Let me ask, since we are a bunch of journalists here, what do you think journalists, especially here in New Jersey, should be looking at? What kinds of stories are we not covering? What would be the best stories to cover? And then also talk a little bit about just the difficulties in covering those, or the sensitivities that journalists need to have as we are trying to talk to sources, particularly those who may be very concerned about, you know, deportation or other action.
Sure. I think, part of this question addresses the former one too. Are there consequences when different arms of the government break the law? Sure. But at what cost, right? We've seen the courts rescind or reinstate visas for students, but we know many students have already self-deported, right? We also know many universities are also reporting that they're anticipating lower enrollment numbers for the fall because of a drop in international students. So, sure, have visas been reinstated? Yes, but at what cost, right? Same for some of the orders, turning the plane around. Okay, yes, the courts did the right thing, but we're still missing 200 people. And we don't know if there's ever going to be justice for them. So I think one role for journalism is to really highlight and humanize these stories, because once the public has an understanding of who these people are and the system that they're up against, it's really easy for cracks to grow in that facade that every immigrant is potentially a criminal, which simply isn't the case, right? And we saw that with the family in Haddon Township. This is a beloved restaurant and institution in the town. People know who this family is. And because their story became this larger sensationalist story, I think it really did turn the tide in recognizing that, hey, we're not going after the worst of society. By casting such a large net, we're actually catching up people who should never be touched by immigration enforcement. So I'd say one is, writing about these stories to give a face to the sort of like mass of people that the White House says that exist. Two, when it comes to sensitivities, I mean, there's a lot of things that can really, really help build relations between community and reporters. One is to reach out to community-based organizations, start forming those relationships now. And what that might look like is setting up an introductory call, sharing some past stories that you have written to say, look, I'm very interested in stories that affect children or affect parents or seniors or whatever it may be. I have a focus on education. And being able to introduce yourself before making that ask will go a much longer way toward, having those sources be able to produce stories for you. I'll give an example of that, how it does not work in reverse. We had a Know Your Rights training in Paterson, and this was immediately following the workplace raid that happened at the seafood market in Newark, and there was incredible demand for this Know Your Rights presentation. We had two news stations reach out and say that they wanted to talk to community members. Well, we figured most people didn't want to be on camera, so we offered that if the news reporters wanted to speak with staff, that they could, but that we're not going to put community members on the spot of being on camera. Well, everyone agreed to that, but simply having the camera van parked on the same block meant that people were hitting up the phone lines at the community center and disenrolling from the Know Your Rights workshop. Actually, I can't make it anymore. Can you please remove my name? I've changed my mind. I don't need this. Can you please make sure that I'm not listed? So make sure that you build those relationships in advance so that beyond just offering anonymity, you can also have a sense of how to physically approach these sites when you are there to tell a story and when you do have permission to tell a story. Language access is, of course, incredibly important. Being able to offer an alias, offering to meet the person you're interviewing at a neutral space. Again, often the community provider can be that neutral space, so they don't feel like stepping out of their house is going to put them at risk. But connecting with organizations like us and folks in our membership are a great first step so that when you make that ask, folks are more receptive to.
Do you want to give us maybe a list in the chat or name some, or maybe after the fact provide some other organizations if folks don't know about them that could help reporters to meet some people to flesh out stories, or at least to get the perspectives of the advocates, you folks who are working with people, in real time in communities?
Sure. I dropped an email address in chat, media@njimmigrantjustice.org. If you send a request to that email address, our internal process is we look at who the request is coming from, what type of community they're looking to speak with, and then we'll comb through our membership to see who may be best positioned to speak with you, either based on geography or based on issue focus. But that would be a great, simple way to get one of these introductions.
Great. We have an awful lot of questions in the chat, and so I don't want to. I definitely want to give folks a chance to ask those. Carlos Avila, are you still on? Do you want to ask your question about guardianship?
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. Many parents, I know many parents coming to us and talking about the situation that they are facing at this time, and but their kids are American citizenship, and they are like 9, 10, 11-year-old, but they want to still keeping going to school. So my question is it advisable, is a good thing to ask for citizenship or a durable power for them, or to give somebody to take care of the kids?
I can probably take that. When Trump won, when Trump won in the end of last year, a group of lawyers that I work with and I put together a frequently asked questions document that is now available in multiple languages, and from Spanish to Ukrainian to many languages. And we address that question. If you are here and you are vulnerable to being removed, plan ahead. What should you do? It varies state by state. Issues concerning your children who are US citizens or maybe have some other right to be here. So I wouldn't just advise, yes, go sign a durable power of attorney ahead of time and in the abstract, because that can be misused. And I would not advise going and having a guardian appointed for your child in the abstract, or ahead of time, because somebody might want to then say they're the boss of your children. But what you do need to do is find a good local agency that can tell you what the right thing to do, what documents you should execute in advance and hold, and have a third party who isn't vulnerable to removal hold for you, so that your children can, if you choose, stay and be protected by another adult. But on the other hand, you may choose to have your children go with you if you're removed, in which case you'll want to make sure they have passports so that they can come back later when they want to. But you really need to find a local agency who can help you. And I'm happy to make those frequently asked questions documents available to this group.
Thank you. Great.
So I see that we have a question. What effect might the Trump administration's new measures targeting sanctuary cities or locations have in the state? Could this lead to people actually starting to cooperate with ICE to avoid federal funding cuts, or is the Immigrant Trust Directive solid enough, do you think, that it would prevent that?
Sure. So I first want to say there have already been attempts to claw back federal funding against sanctuary cities and states. And courts, knocked that EO out. I think it was, 2 weeks ago, a week ago or so. So that attempt to claw back federal funding has already failed. Now, we did see an executive order come out this week that attempts to do something similar. But if you look closely at the language, there's actually not any detail about how they would go about withholding that federal funding. How it would be any different from what the courts just struck down. Essentially, what Monday's EO says is that they want a checklist of which cities and states have pro-immigrant policies. And before we talk about the impact of sanctuary policies, I want to first make it clear there's no definition for what a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state is. There's no authorizing body. There's no certifying threshold for what types of things cities or states need to do to call themselves sanctuary cities. And what we saw a lot in the first Trump administration was sort of politically ascendant careerists saying that they're sanctuary cities, but what they're actually doing is setting up a multilingual hotline, right? Or we had, on the other end, cities who were passing municipal ID programs and setting up free legal services and free ESOL classes. But that meant that you would have giant cities in New York State and itty bitty cities in Iowa, both claiming to be sanctuary cities. But if I were an immigrant moving from, Iowa to New York, there's no guarantee that I would receive the same services just because it's one sanctuary city to another. So I think this sanctuary city targeting really sort of overinflates what sanctuary cities and states do. A number of cities in New Jersey outright call themselves sanctuary cities, or they may call themselves a fair and welcoming city, or they may offer county or municipal ID programs. But to be clear, the courts have already struck down attempts to withhold federal funding from certain jurisdictions based on policies that they are empowered to enact.
Yeah, a little
Gotcha.
additional word on that. The real issue there is no concept of sanctuary in the law. It's a term that people have taken from faith traditions over generations. And my personal view is it's a mistake for cities and states to use that to describe themselves. It's sort of like raising your hand and saying, I want to be a target. What the challenges from the administration come down to arise from the fact that ICE is the within the United States police for immigration. Customs and Border Protection is the at the border police. ICE has about 20,000 employees across the country. And that includes legal secretaries and administrators and whoever answers the phone, if anybody answers the phone. And there are 10 to 12 million undocumented people in the country. So the federal government does not have at its fingertips a police force that is even remotely close to doing what Trump has promised to do. Therefore, they're trying to strike deals with city, county sheriffs, local police forces, and state police forces to do their work for them. And places that call themselves sanctuary jurisdictions tend to be the ones who are refusing to do that. So in your coverage, it's a great story to talk about the separation of powers, enunciation of powers to the states, who does what, and can the administration force cities to do federal work and that sort of thing. That's where all this arises out of.
Jong-Won Lee, do you want to answer your question? You talked about advice for immigrants interacting with local law enforcement.
That's right. So people are worrying about asking assistance from local law enforcement. So, but should we be careful when we are interacting with the local law enforcement, or no worry because they have no authority, or maybe there is no 287G affiliation with the ICE. So generally, I know, but generally people cannot distinguish federal and the local law enforcement. So how can we distinguish? How can ask assistance from them? Or what should we be careful?
Yeah,
I mean, the real answer is you can't. You can't distinguish. You can go look at what your local law enforcement folks are saying, and have they signed an agreement with the federal government to cooperate? That's the immediate tell. But even if they haven't, there are individual officers within police and sheriff's departments that will take it upon themselves to help the administration. So there's no way that you can assure a particular community that you're safe from police. But the overarching thing is find out what the police agency's policy is.
Yeah, and I think we're in a very different world now that the Laken-Riley Act has become law. So I think two things is that Linda is absolutely correct. There is no law that bars immigration officers from lying about their identification. We've heard stories about ICE officers knocking on doors and saying, hey, there was an accident. We think your son was involved. We need you to come outside and identify the vehicle. And as soon as that person stepped outside of their door, ICE officers arrested them. As you've probably seen, often their vests say police, right? Or they may say something or have like insignia that makes them look like local police department, but they are not. And please don't mistake that just because any officer is wearing a uniform or a vest or carrying a weapon, that they are justified in being there. ICE is immigration offenses are civil offenses. And what that means is they're similar to IRS offenses, right? If you don't do it exactly right, you face a fine. If you have like multiple iterations of not doing something right, then maybe it becomes more severe. But I think many of us would be alarmed if we saw IRS officers in bulletproof vests with machine guns just patrolling our streets, right? But yet we allow that with immigration enforcement. And they use the masquerade of law enforcement to get people to comply in advance and get people to relinquish their rights in advance. Because most people, when they see an officer, just want to be helpful and answer questions. So ICE officers use that as a ruse to get more information out of people than they're really allowed to take. The thing with the Laken-Riley Act is this is so much more dangerous now, even with the Immigrant Trust Directive in place in New Jersey, because the Laken-Riley Act says that even if you're accused of a certain crime, that can be enough for you to be indefinitely detained or deported. So you can imagine a place where maybe in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, there is a restaurant or a club or a store that doesn't want a certain type of clientele. And if they accuse someone of loitering or from shoplifting, that person can face a permanent consequence of immigration detention or deportation simply by being profiled. And even if charges are dropped or those accusations never result in a conviction, it does not matter, because immigration, again, is a civil thing that sits outside of the criminal legal system. Even if the criminal legal system drops the charges, even if you serve your full sentence and are released, you can still be re-detained by ICE. You can also still be deported by ICE.
Wow, we have a lot of legal questions here. Let me ask this one. Does marriage to a U.S. citizen still guarantee permanent residency?
It
Linda?
depends. Yeah, it depends. If you are in the country without permission, then to normalize your situation, to apply for that, to become a green card holder by virtue of marriage, you are required to leave the country and come back in. Okay, that's part of the processing. However, being here, simply being here for a period of time without permission incurs a bar to readmission for a period of time, which can be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or depending on how many times you've come across the border without permission, it can be permanent. So not everyone who marries a citizen is going to be able to successfully adjust to getting a green card and becoming a citizen themselves. At the very end of the Biden administration, that administration tried to change the process so that people wouldn't have to leave the country and come back. And that was promptly challenged and enjoined in court.
Here's another one.
Let's also make sure.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, let's also make sure to note that green card holders themselves are not immune to detention and deportation under this administration. And there was an example of a couple from the Midwest who were, the husband was a Trump supporter. They were returning from their honeymoon in Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory, so not actually international. And the fiance was still detained, I think she was a wife by that point, but was still detained, and she, had a major immigration case. Again, we have officers that are over interpreting the law, and there's very little consequence for those infractions.
Anthony, do you want to ask that question about TPS?
Yes, just a follow-up to Linda's response. How about those who had TPS before? Now that the TPS had ended, and now the person is marrying a US citizen, does that person still need to leave the country?
Not necessarily, but you have to do it while you are in status. You have to do it while you are in status. If you've allowed your TPS permission to expire, which doesn't mean you allowed it, but if TPS ended and you didn't leave, then you're going to have a problem. But yeah, having TPS is a potential. The premise of TPS allows you to try and find another status while you have the TPS. There are many, many people here, though, from places like Afghanistan and Venezuela who were allowed into the country and then awarded TPS. Even some Ukrainians fit into this and thought, well, I'll just wait until Congress fixes this because they'll fix it all for me and I'll be able to stay. And they are in desperate circumstances now because there's nothing else they can apply for, and TPS alone will not allow them to stay.
I've got one here. I'm going to butcher your name. I'm so sorry. It's Mohsin Zahir. Do you want to ask your question? Okay. So he asks, do you have any update from the USCIS proposal to collect social media identifiers on certain forms as part of enhanced screening and vetting of immigration applicants.
I don't have any updates on that, but I will tell you that I also presume they're already doing it. What you're talking about, I think, is a modification of the application forms where you would be asked to list your login credentials. You know, you can't make things private, and provide all the social media accounts you have. But I believe that the government is already looking at social media posts, and I advise clients not to post anything remotely political on any issue on social media.
And I think even if this were to be in practice, there would not be a, sort of contract that we're able to look at to see what parameters or what certain criteria that they're looking at. I mean, we've seen reports that they're using certain like AI consultants to trawl for social media accounts, but does that mean something like explicitly posting and advocating for an action on something? Does that mean expressing sympathy for something, or does that mean following an account that may be directly advocating or sympathizing for something? So we don't know, and we may not know, but I don't think the solution for us is knowing what those parameters are. The solution is really fighting to defend those First Amendment rights that, people do have freedom to speech regardless of their citizenship. And, there's been a number of reports at the border and at airports that, people are being asked to unlock their phones and show, show border officers their, social media accounts and allow them access to their devices. So it's really important that if you think that you may be stopped at a border crossing, again, not just if you're undocumented, this has been happening to green card holders and everyone in between, that you speak with an immigration attorney to make the right risk assessment for yourself before traveling.
And if they ask you to unlock your phone, do you have to do it? Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yeah,
And-
the only
and
issues are where you're a lawyer or a doctor and you have some kind of actual legal privilege that can protect material that you are obligated to keep secret. But that doesn't mean my relationship with my boyfriend is really confidential and I don't want you to see it. So yeah, that's there have actually been stories in the national press about this issue, warning people. But they also have suggested don't wipe your phone, because that also might bring a different kind of scrutiny to you if you are all of a sudden traveling with a completely blank phone.
But could you say, I have the right not to, for privacy reasons, and I have my lawyer to speak to you, or that's not going to work?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, when you're crossing the border, you're in a zone where you're not in the United States yet, right? And those border officers can deny you entry. We're in this liminal space where you're coming from an international place into the United States, which is why you are meeting with that border officer. They can use that discretion to say, look, based on what I saw on this person's phone, I'm not allowing them entry. So, the physical location of the plane landing does not mean that politically or legally they'll allow you in. So it's really important, even before leaving, to do that screening with an immigration attorney first.
I have one more related question. I think we're going to wrap it up. Any information on this mandatory registration requirement that's fairly new from the Trump administration? And whether people are registering, should they register?
Sure. So I dropped a link in reply, and I'll also share, we have a social media graphic on this. Look, this registration requirement is just such an authoritarian overreach, but even I think that the impact of the registration rule is fear more than it is the policy themselves, because the truth is a lot of people are already registered through contact with the immigration system. But I think it is yet another tool to scare people into the shadows or scare people towards self-deportation. But I've listed out in some of the links some criteria where you may already meet the threshold for registration and not have to fill out that form. There are pros and cons to filling and not filling it out if you don't meet that criteria. So the most important thing to do is to meet with an immigration attorney. And in the links above, I also linked to some directories of pro bono and low bono legal services here in New Jersey so that you can find someone who can advise you on this. But it's really important to examine this on a case-by-case basis. Unfortunately, this isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all know your rights approach.
There's a couple slides on story ideas that you might or might not find interesting.
So that was going to be my very last question, which is if each of you could just give us one of your, I'd like to see all of the ideas, but just give us one story idea that you think reporters should be going after right now. Linda, you want to start?
Well, I would like to see more pressure being put on Congress members. And one of the questions I saw in the chat was, how can Congress do their job in this environment or with this administration? It's obviously very difficult if you're a Republican to withstand the pressure that you're getting from your peers and the president. But what are the Congress people in the jurisdictions you cover saying to people that they represent? What are their policy positions, soft positions? I bet you they say, we love immigrants, they're part of our state. Hold them to that, call them out if they are doing something different, when they go vote on things and they fall in line because if they don't do whatever it is that the whip tells them to do and the president is demanding, they won't get another committee appointment and they'll lose their job. I think we have to hold Congress to task, and maybe things will change in the midterm and the balance will be slightly different, but it goes for both sides. What are they saying and what are they doing? And let's call some attention to this.
Yeah, I
Go ahead,
echo that
Amy.
completely. And the same suggestion earlier of we really need to humanize these stories. And rather than giving you an individual pitch, I'd like folks to think back to the first early days, 100 days of the Biden administration. It was in March of 2021 that Governor Greg Abbott launched Operation Lone Star. And through that effort, he was able to very effectively weaponize an issue of immigration that it became the primary critique of the Biden administration, even though, even though crossings were at a record low at the time, even though there were no real major changes when you look at the numbers, but simply that act of making a very hyper-local story look as if it was happening everywhere has brought us to the place where we are today. And I think New Jersey has a really unique opportunity, especially with our gubernatorial race, to right-size the conversation on immigration. As Colleen said, it's not California, it's not Texas, it's not Arizona, it's not New York or Florida who has, the bulk of immigration stories. New Jersey is number 2 in the nation when it comes to our total share of population. And I think both our communities and the rest of the nation deserve to hear these stories and understand what the truth is versus the rhetoric coming out of the White House.
Amy, I'm going to ask you to send me an email with all of those governor ideas, because that's kind of what I'm focusing on. So please do that. I want to thank Linda and Amy so much for taking so much time. This is such a complex issue. There's so many ways we can go. I appreciate all of your insights, your thoughts, as well as your story ideas and your suggestions for how we can do a better job at this. So thank you very much.